Christian, all the way to the bottom comes your citizenship or your family. I mean, we're now children of God. We're now citizens of the city of God. And so our membership in God's family becomes more important than any other family. Our citizenship in God's city becomes more foundational than any other citizenship. Now, it doesn't usually go all the way down there fast, does it? In fact, as far as I understand Ephesians 4, where it talks about putting off the old self and putting on the new self as the process of sanctification, I believe that that's really what the process of sanctification is over the years. That my family identity in God's family, my citizenship in God's city, are moving down further and further to the very bottom, so everything else, in a sense, is relativized. If you are, put it this way, I'm a Christian first and I'm a white American second. And that means I have more in common with a non-white person of another country who's a Christian than I do with a white man of my own country who's not. That certainly wasn't true for a long time, even after I became a Christian. It just wasn't. But eventually what happens is it pushes on down as you're putting on the new self. And when it's down at the bottom, what that does is it relativizes everything else. Your self-esteem is still, to some degree, your identity to some degree, is still, you can be proud of your people, you can be proud of your race, your nationality, but the fact is now you have one foot in and one foot out. And you can usually see the sins of your race and the idols of your home culture in a way that before you just couldn't, because you had no other way of judging them. And this change in identity is absolutely crucial, critical, if you're going to have a multi-ethnic church. Now you say, well, didn't you just tell me that it took years for you to be working you might say, the Jesus layer to the bottom, so that my racial layer and my ethnic layer and my political layer didn't supersede my Christian faith. I said, yeah, it took time. Let me give you a quick example of this sanctification at work. I know about a man who was from Mississippi, an American, very, very conservative Presbyterian, by the way, and also a very conservative Republican, very conservative politically. Being a conservative Presbyterian, he always idealized the idea of moving to somewhere in Scotland and maybe especially the Highlands of Scotland and being in a proper Presbyterian church for a while. And so he made his way to some small town in the Highlands of Scotland, and he worshiped with this church and worked a little bit with them for a couple months. And it was wonderful. It was so strict. He said, you could not turn a television set on a Sunday on the Sabbath without getting a lot of growls. And he says, they even kind of know it's happening. You don't even have to be in the same room. They just know. So he said, it was just as strict as, he was so happy, a strict, really conservative, Calvinist, Presbyterian, red meat. And one day, he was talking with them about something that brought them into discussing politics and economics, and he suddenly realized, to his absolute shock, that all of his revered, super-duper conservative Presbyterian friends were all socialists. At least by his definition, they were socialists. Probably by their definition, they would have considered themselves moderate, But by his definition, they're socialists. And after he brought his jaw back up, onto his mouth and spoke, and he spent quite a number of hours over the next few weeks talking with them, and he came back not really changed politically, but changed. And he began to realize, he says, not only were they politically very different than me, but they were their views on their Christian beliefs. They were not just going along with the local politics. He said, they actually were working out their beliefs and calling the government in some ways to honor their commitments to the poor, whereas we wouldn't think that. And he came back and he said he realized that it didn't change him politically, but it changed him spiritually. He was chastened. He was humbled. He realized he had thought that if you're going to be a conservative Christian, theologically you would automatically be very, very conservative politically. And he realized that just wasn't the case. And he came back realizing, I still have more in common with these people. He said, back in the U.S., if he'd even talked probably to a Democrat, he would say, how can a Christian be a Democrat? And he knew Christians were Democrats, but he just didn't talk to them. Here you had people who he really respected spiritually. See, he said, these are my brothers and sisters. And when they forced him to say, hey, they forced him to open his mind. And what happened was his politics, which had been almost at the very bottom of his identity, it basically got superseded. It was pushed higher, you see. He just wasn't nearly as committed to that as before, because he began to realize to be a Christian, he's a Christian first and he's a political conservative or liberal second. Now let me say something about, I said the one thing you need is to have a Christian-shaped identity, and it takes time. The other thing you need is to have a Christian-shaped understanding of culture itself. Now what I mean by that is, I'm already there. Like I said, somebody might say this isn't the second point, it's more the first point. There's a great cultural flexibility because of the change in identity. There's a great cultural flexibility to Christianity. Here's a couple of interesting statistics, I think. Did you know that 95% of all Muslims live in the Middle East, Africa, or South Asia? I know it might be a little hard to believe, but in all of Europe, South America, Far Eastern Asia, or North America, only 5% of Muslims live there. So 95% of Muslims still live in the Middle East, Africa, South Asia. 98% of Hindus still live in India. 88% of all Buddhists live in East Asia. But Christianity, 25% of identified Christians, 25% live in Europe, 25% live in Central and South America, 22% live in Africa, 15% live in Asia, and 12% live in North America. There's no other religion in the world that is really, truly multi-continental. And Richard Bauckham, who was taught at St. Andrews for a number of years, says this about these numbers. He says, quote, almost certainly Christianity exhibits more cultural diversity than any other religion, and that must say something about it. Absolutely. Now, why? How so? Well, the fact is the New Testament doesn't have a book of Leviticus. That's what happened. Religions that are based not on grace, but on works, which is pretty much all of them outside Christianity, have got to be able to tell you, here's what you can eat, and here's what you can wear, and here's how much you can do this, and it basically micromanages your life like the book of Leviticus did. And certainly Islam has a lot of that, and a lot of the other religions do too. Christianity doesn't, because we're saved by grace, right? And what that does mean is that Christianity has always been culturally so remarkably free compared to the other religions. It has enabled you, the whole struggle in the book of Acts is about, will the Gentiles need to become culturally Jewish in order to be Christians? And the answer is no. And what's so intriguing about Acts 15 especially, Acts 15 is a remarkable place for us to study, because Acts 15 was a message by the elders and the apostles to the churches saying that the Gentiles do not have to be circumcised. That's an amazing thing. This had been the mark of the people of God for centuries. And for them to say, no, you do not have to be circumcised to be a member of the people of God, meant a major change, at the very least culturally. It means, no, you don't have to be Jewish in order to be a Christian. But then, as you might remember, it added 3 other things. It says, you don't have to be circumcised, you don't have to follow the Mosaic law, you can be Gentile and still be a Christian. But we ask you to refrain from 3 things. Very often when I've expounded the scriptures over the years, I go through these three things, and they're a little strange. They don't seem to fit in the same categories, and only recently have I really come to see the beautiful wisdom and how it's really, the three things are supposed to be for us as well. Here's what the three, one is, he said, don't eat meat offered to idols. Now, it's interesting in light of the fact that Paul has made a very good case, of course, elsewhere, that idols are nothing, and therefore there's nothing intrinsically sinful about eating meat if it had been offered to idols. But the real problem for Gentiles was this, and that is that it's one thing to say, oh, I'm actually coming into Christianity. It's another thing to completely eschew the gods of your culture. See, on the one hand, we say, oh, anybody can come, and you don't have to lose your culture. If you're Chinese, you become a Christian, you stay Chinese. If you're African, you stay African. If you're European, you stay European. If you're American, you stay American. But every one of those cultures has not only got things like food and dress and other kinds of, the way in which the family is organized. There's all sorts of things that culturally Christianity has always adapted. But at the heart of every culture are idols. At the heart of every culture are idols. Because of where I am in New York City, dealing with multi-ethnic congregations in my situation was dealing with East Asians and Anglos. So white people, some of you might know that my three congregations now that I gave away were given to one white pastor, one Chinese pastor, and one Korean pastor. And what I do know about Asians is that whereas Asian culture, non-Christian Asian culture, tends to make an idol, an absolute, an ultimate, out of the family. So what matters is the family. And nothing else matters at all. It matters more than God, actually. Because in the end, if your family wants you to do this and God wants you to do this, well, you have to do what the family says. But us white people, especially white Americans, are highly individualistic. We make an idol out of individual choice. We don't mind being Christians in a lot of ways, but if God's going to come, if the Bible's going to get in the way of something I really, really want to do that I feel is true to who I am. So you see, white people make an idol out of our individual choice, at least in my church. Asian people tend to make an idol out of family. And we have to both recognize we've got to stop eating meat offered to idols. We come into our Christian faith, and where you're an Asian Christian, you're a white American Christian, but we have to realize that we can bring a lot of our cultural customs, a lot of our cultural perspectives, but not the idols. You can't bring the idols with you. That's point one. Point two, don't eat animals that are strangled, that still have their blood in them, okay? And you say, what is that about? Isn't that a Mosaic thing? I thought the whole point was the Gentiles don't have to follow the Mosaic law. What is this? It's like giving something away and then bringing it back. No, what it's really trying to say is Jew and Gentile are going to have to live together, right? That means always avoid unnecessary cultural offense. I said the Jewish Christians have been raised never eating meat with blood in it. And so even though there's no sin in doing it, stretch culturally. Stretch. And I'm going to get back to this. If you want to have a multi-ethnic congregation, you have to stretch and bend over backward and to refrain from doing things that you really have every right to do, but because you're trying to work together. You're trying, in a multi-ethnic congregation, everybody's going to have to stretch for everybody else. If anybody just says, no, you all have to change for me, it's not going to happen. So first of all, you don't bring your idols. You can bring all kinds of other cultural goods into your Christian faith, but not the idols of your culture, because you all have idols. Secondly, you do all kinds of willingness to stretch and refrain from things to avoid unnecessary cultural offense. And thirdly, if you remember, it says the third thing you have to refrain from is porneia. And porneia is it's a Greek word that outside of the Bible just meant something like male prostitution. Inside the Bible, it's a technical term. It was filled with meaning. It's very, 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 very precise. We don't have a really good English synonym, and therefore translators never do a good job there, but I don't know how they could. And it simply means porneia is any sex outside of a marriage between a man and a woman. That's porneia. Anything any use of sex outside of a marriage between a man and a woman. And what's intriguing there is to say, bring all your cultural diversity in, but keep out your culture's idols. Stretch and stretch and stretch for the other members of your congregation to try to make room for them who are different than you culturally. And thirdly, you do not give in on the Christian sex ethic. There is no way that you are adapting to the culture, you are working with other people, you're trying to open up. That is an absolute given. It doesn't matter from culture to culture to culture. Actually, the Christian sex ethic really doesn't work, frankly, in any culture. It's revolutionary in any culture, but we're not talking about that today. But the fact is that that's one of the three things that should mark the new multi-ethnic movement of the people of God.